It didn't begin with explosions. It didn't even begin with news cameras. It began with a quiet collapse. A slow, aching silence that crept across America's heartland like a cancer. Fields that once stretched endlessly into the horizon were left untouched. Grain silos, once bursting with harvest, stood hollow. Tractors sat like rusting skeletons, their tires sinking into dirt that had once fed millions. This wasn't nature's doing. It wasn't a drought or disease or disaster. It was man-made. Deliberate. And at the center of the unraveling stood Donald Trump, a man whose obsession with tariffs had sparked a trade war that turned the American food belt into a wasteland. Before we unravel how this economic assault led to a full-scale food crisis, do one thing right now: subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update from this channel. What's happening out there isn't just a political issue, it's a human one. And the more people who know, the more we can fight back. Trump said it would be simple. He called it America First. A few tariffs here, a few penalties there, and suddenly the world would come crawling back to the US begging for our goods. That's what he promised. But the world didn't crawl. It moved on. China, once one of the biggest buyers of American soybeans, canceled billions in contracts and turned to Brazil. European markets redirected their supply chains to more stable partners. And America? America was left with barns full of unsold crops and farmers with empty bank accounts. It wasn't just soybeans. It was corn, wheat, pork, dairy. Prices crashed. Exports tanked. And the support Trump claimed would be there never came. Small family farms, passed down through generations, faced a choice: sell now or lose everything. Many chose to sell. But they didn't sell to neighbors. They sold to hedge funds, to foreign investors. Or they packed up and left the country altogether, relocating to Canada, Brazil, and Mexico, where land was cheaper, regulations lighter, and policies actually favored agriculture instead of choking it. You heard that right. American farmers, the backbone of the country, the same men and women who fed the nation for over a century, were leaving. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. The system that was supposed to protect them had betrayed them. And what was Trump doing while this unfolded? Holding rallies, shouting slogans, blaming China, blaming Democrats, blaming the media. But never once admitting the truth: his tariffs were a bullet to the head of the very people who trusted him. What's worse is that it wasn't just farmers paying the price. The impact of Trump's trade war trickled into every corner of the country. Supply chains broke down. Grocery store shelves emptied. Prices spiked. Eggs became a luxury. Milk became scarce. Chicken doubled in price. And low-income families who already struggled to get by were hit hardest. The food crisis had begun, not as a result of climate, but of ego. You see, it wasn't just about exports. Tariffs didn't only affect what we sold abroad. They also affected what we imported, and American agriculture is deeply tied to global supply. Farmers needed steel to repair equipment. Tariffs made it expensive. They needed fertilizer. Tariffs made it scarce. Tractor parts, irrigation tools, seeds, feed, everything became more expensive. Costs skyrocketed, but profits didn't. And the government? They offered a few bailout checks, which barely covered the cost of fuel for a season. And as the money dried up, so did the hope. Farm towns in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri became ghost towns. Schools shut down. Stores closed. Churches stood empty. Suicide rates among farmers reached all-time highs. People who had spent their lives producing food for others now lined up at food banks, the same banks that were running out of supplies themselves. And still, the silence from Washington was deafening. When asked about the growing crisis, Trump doubled down. He claimed it was a necessary sacrifice. He said the farmers were patriots. He praised their loyalty, their strength. But he never offered a real solution. Because in his mind, optics mattered more than outcomes. And loyalty was more valuable than livelihood. But loyalty has limits. Especially when your children are hungry. So, many left. Mexico offered American farmers incentives to set up shop. Brazil granted land access and open trade networks. Canada welcomed them with streamlined policy and promises of stability. And so, they went. Not because they didn't love their country, but because their country no longer loved them back. In their absence, multinational corporations swept in. Big AG firms bought land on the cheap. Hedge funds started leasing farmland for investment portfolios. Foreign companies, some tied to hostile governments, began acquiring key parts of America's food supply. All while politicians argued on TV. This wasn't just economic devastation. It was a national security threat. The country that once fed the world was now begging for imports just to survive. Our grocery stores became battlegrounds. School cafeterias cut meals. Food assistance programs couldn't keep up. Families rationed. Children went to bed hungry. And all the while, Trump kept shouting about winning. But no one was winning. The collapse rippled across sectors. Restaurants shut down due to supply shortages. Truckers lost routes. Equipment manufacturers laid off workers. And still, the narrative from Trump's team remained the same: this is necessary. We're bringing jobs back. Jobs. What jobs? The factories didn't return. The farms didn't recover. The only thing that came back was desperation. Meanwhile, in countries like Brazil, where many American farmers had relocated, agri-exports soared. Their economy grew. Their global standing rose. And they thanked America, not for helping, but for stepping aside. Inside America, the cracks widened. The partisan divide grew uglier. Urban and rural communities, once interdependent, became hostile toward one another. Distrust soared. Riots broke out near shipping centers. Farmers protested at state capitals. And then, something unprecedented happened: several states declared agricultural emergencies. Governors from both political parties called on the federal government for relief. Some began direct food distribution. Others petitioned to open emergency trade deals. But it was too late. Years of damage couldn't be undone in months. America's food infrastructure had been hollowed out. And still, Trump refused to admit fault. He pointed to temporary aid packages, subsidies, and scattered policy wins. But none of it mattered. Because the damage wasn't just logistical. It was emotional. Cultural. Existential. The American farmer, once the symbol of strength and independence, had been brought to his knees by a government that forgot who it served. And the people noticed. By the 2026 election cycle, the anger was boiling over. Farm groups that once hosted Trump proudly now disinvited him. Endorsements were rescinded. Longtime Republican strongholds began flipping. Not because voters suddenly turned liberal, but because they were tired of starving. They had believed in Trump. They had given him their faith, their vote, their sweat. And he had repaid them with speeches. And while the political war raged, the real war, the one for survival, continued in quiet kitchens and broken barns across the country. Parents skipping meals. Seniors choosing between medicine and food. Children asking why lunch looked smaller than it used to. This is America, post-tariff war. Where the shelves are half empty and the promises are completely broken. And yet, amid the collapse, there is something rising. Communities are organizing. Independent farmers are banding together. New coalitions are forming, not around party lines, but around values, food, fairness, and future. They're demanding a new agricultural policy that puts people first. That respects farmers, restores exports, repairs supply chains, and reclaims food sovereignty. They're no longer asking for help. They're demanding change. And for the first time in years, Washington is listening. Because they have no choice. The crisis created by Trump's tariff war may have fractured the country, but it also awakened it. The silence of the fields is turning into a roar of defiance. The same people who were ignored are now leading the charge. And they're not just fighting for crops or profit, they're fighting for the soul of a nation. So, as we stand in the aftermath of this crisis, one thing is clear: this wasn't just bad policy. It was a betrayal. A betrayal of the working class. Of the farmers. Of every American who believed in the promise that hard work would lead to stability. But out of betrayal can come a reckoning. And that reckoning is here. If you believe these stories matter, if you believe food is not a luxury but a right, then help us spread this truth. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. We will keep telling the stories they try to bury. We will keep naming the names they try to protect. Because this isn't just about farming. It's about survival. It's about justice. And it's about never letting this happen again.